Day 2 on factoring and solving quadratic equations. We have the same objective as day 1. We're going to solve these quadratic equations by factoring. But here in day 2 we're going to look at a couple different case scenarios. The first case is when we have no b term or bx term. And then the second case is when there is no c term, and we're going to learn how to handle each case. Alright, so let's start with number 1 here. X squared minus 36 equals 0. So when there's no bx term, we're going to plug in 0x for it, and then factor as usual. And then once we have it in factored form, set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So we're going to rewrite this as x squared plus 0x minus 36 equal to 0. Alright, now our rules for solving equations, like what we learned in day 1, they apply right here. So we're looking for factors of a times c that sum to b. Well, our a is equal to 1. Remember, that's the coefficient in front of our x squared term. It's not there, so it's 1. Our b is the coefficient in front of our x, so that's 0. And our c is the negative 36. So a times c, 1 times negative 36, so we want factors of negative 36 that sum to our b, which is 0. Alright, so let's list the factors of 36. And we know that 1 has to be positive and 1 has to be negative, because when you multiply them together, we need negative 36. So we have 1 and 36, we have 2 and 18, we have 3 and 12, 4 and 9, and then 6 and 6. Now, if I look down at the bottom, if I make 1 6 positive and 1 6 negative, notice how they're going to sum to 0. So those are the factors I'm looking for. Once I have them, remember that we put them over whatever our a term is. In this case, it's 1. So 6 over 1 and negative 6 over 1. And then we write them in, to write in factored form, we put our left parenthesis, and then we have a 1, and that always gets paired with an x. So 1x or x, and then plus 6. It's whatever's above it. And then our next set of parentheses, we put a 1x first, or x, and then what goes second? A minus 6. Okay, and then this is, oops, this right here is factored form. So if it said, hey, factor x squared minus 36, no, there's what you do. Now if it says solve, which in this case it does, what we have to do is set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So subtract 6 from both sides. So we get x equaling negative 6. There's a solution. And then add 6 to both sides here. And you get x equals a positive 6. Alright, so those are my solutions. And they're also referred to as your roots, your zeros, or your x-intercepts. Because if I was to graph this, if I would plug that into the calculator, the graph will cross the x-axis at 6 and negative 6. Alright, now let's look here. So here's an example where there is no c term. However, we can factor out at least an x here. So we're going to do that. So notice when we remember when we were finding the GCF, we looking at the variable. So we have x squared and we have an x. And remember I said, all right, the GCF of the variable is going to be the smallest one. So the smallest one is going to be just x. So I'm going to put that out in front. Okay, and then I have to divide each of those terms. So I have x squared over x and 4x over x. You got to divide each of the terms, x squared and 4x, by your greatest common factor, which is x. So x squared divided by x, that's going to be x to the first. Remember, it's 2 minus 1. 2 minus 1 will be 1. So x to the first is x. And then 4x divided by x, those x cancel, and we're left with 4. Alright, so this would be factored form. And then to solve for the solutions, set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So we have x equals 0 as a solution. And we have x equaling negative 4 as a solution. Alright, let's look at the next couple. So we're going to go here. We have 3x minus 48 equals 0. Now, before I rewrite my bx term as 0x, I notice that I can factor out a 3. I can pull out the greatest common factor, which is 3. Alright, because 3 and 48, the GCF is 3. So 3x squared divided by 3, negative 48 divided by 3. Alright, what's that give us? So 3x squared divided by 3, that's going to leave us an x squared. And then a negative 48 divided by 3 is going to leave us a negative 16 equal to 0. Alright, now notice I have x squared. I got no bx term, so I'm going to replace that with 0x minus 16, and I set that equal to 0. So let's factor that right there. So we're looking for factors of a times c that sum to b. So your a equals 1, your b equals 0, your c equals negative 16. So factors of negative 16 that sum to 0. Right? 1 times negative 16 is negative 16, and they have to sum to 0. So my factors of 16, 1 and 16, 2 and 8, and 4 and 4. I know one has to be positive and one has to be negative, because when you multiply them, I need a negative. So my eye is drawn to the bottom pair. Make one negative. When you multiply those together, you get negative 16. When you add them together, you get 0. Alright, so to write it now in factored form, I write the 4 over 1, and I put it over 1 because that's my a, and then I have my negative 4 over 1. Okay, so draw your parenthesis. What goes first inside the parenthesis? You pair that 1 with an x, so 1x or x, and then plus 4. And then I repeat with the next factor. So a 1x or x, and here you have a negative 4. So this right here is the equation written in factored form. Now I want to find the solutions, so you set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So 3 does not equal 0, so forget that. Subtract 4 from both sides here. We get x equaling negative 4. Add 4 both sides here. X equals a positive 4. So those are my two solutions. Alright, let's look at this one. This will be the last one that we do. We have 12x squared minus 3x. So what I notice is there's no c term, but each of these terms has an x, at least one x. So we can factor that out. We can also factor out a 3, right? Because what we notice is the factors of 12, 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4, and then the factors of 3 are 1 and 3. So our greatest common factor is 3. So that's with the numbers. So you can yank out a 3. And then with the variables, notice you have an x squared and an x. So what do you factor out? The smallest one. So that's going to be an x. Alright, what's left in parentheses? You divide each of the terms, the 12x squared, you divide it by the greatest common factor, which is 3x. And then you have a negative 3x over the GCF, which is 3x. Alright, so 12 divided by 3, that's going to give us 4. X squared divided by x, that gives us an x. Negative 3 divided by 3, that's a negative 1. X divided by x is 1, so negative 1 equal to 0. So this is factored form. Alright, now to solve this, set both of those factors equal to 0. So we have 3x equals 0 and 4x minus 1 equals 0. Alright, now this I have a 3x equaling 0. This isn't just a number like it was in the previous example, so be careful here because I'm going to divide both sides by 3. That cancels, so I'm left with x equals 0 over 3, which is 0. So 0 is the solution. And then here I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I get 4x equaling 1. Divide both sides by 4. X equals 1/4. Alright, so be careful with that. Don't want to lose a root. And so those are the solutions, 0 and 1/4. Okay, what I want you to do right now is complete the rest of the problems. You do not have to do the last two in the mixed review, so C and D you don't need to do, but do the rest. Hit pause right now because I'm going to post the answers so you can check. And so go ahead, hit pause, and then when you're finished, tune back in and check your answers. So here's the answers for set 3. Here are the answers for set 4. And then here are the answers for A and B of the mixed review. Alright, so you don't have to do C and D, and this wraps up the lesson.